Welcome back. Now that you've heard about the Delian League, the network of alliances between Athens and the cities of the islands of the Aegean Sea and the cities on Asia Minor, now we're going to talk more about the actual architect of that whole network, our politician Pericles. It's important to understand that Pericles was, in fact, one of the biggest names of all time in Athens. Essentially, he would expand Athens from the city of Athens itself in Attica all the way across north a little bit, and then over northeast, and then east until all the way down through the west coast of Asia Minor. He would have Athenian influence, even as far north as the Black Sea, as a matter of fact. So Pericles accomplished an enormous feat for the Athenians politically. The difficulty was that in expanding Athenian power in this way, it's possible he was somewhat reckless because he appears to have underestimated the forceful opposition that the Athenians would incur from other cities on the outside. And he also probably overestimated the Athenian populace's capacity to run government on its own terms, being able to carry it forward. Because once Pericles died of the plague during the opening years of the Peloponnesian War, it became immediately clear that the Athenians did not really know how to run this particular democracy on his own. Let's now talk about Pericles himself, his bio, and a little bit about the history that leads him to his position of power. So first of all, Pericles himself was not an especially distinguished person growing up. We do know that he did train with quite a few philosophers, and so therefore had an outstanding education. One in particular philosopher especially was Anaxagoras. Another one was Protagoras. So Pericles took in a lot of their points of view, especially the idea that instead of looking to the gods for a means of explaining natural occurrences on Earth, and especially in the Greek world, that it was necessary to consider mankind, to be the center of all things, and to determine his own fate and be able to make his own decisions that would therefore lead mankind in a human way to be able to advance. From this, Pericles may have realized that the Athenians, with their intellectual bent that was beginning to really ferment in this particular time period, may have seen that the Athenians had a lot of potential to expand their empire quite widely, and therefore saw to it in time that the Athenians, in fact, carried that course forward. And it turns out he had a lot of proponents with him to be able to lead the Athenians forward. Now, Pericles himself came to the fore in 472 BC when he produced Aeschylus's play Persians. Recall in our prior discussion of this play that this was the only play that Aeschylus wrote of a historical nature rather than a mythological one. And this is our only surviving play from all three tragic playwrights that was historical. And from what we can tell from our other sources, it seems that this might have been anomalous in general in Greek tragedy to base a tragedy on a specific contemporary event. Excuse me. So, Pericles produced this play. One of the effects of that was that he catapulted himself into the public eye with an Athenian audience by getting his name attached to this quite unusual and special play. It is conceivable in this time that Pericles was trying to look out for his good friend Themistocles. Both Pericles and Themistocles had taken great steps forward to work the Athenian population up to a sense of its own power. Pericles, of course, had observed Themistocles from the sidelines before Pericles was old enough to do it himself, as Themistocles took the Athenians to power in the 480s BC, building up their fleet. One especially important moment in the middle of the 480s BC was that the Athenians discovered a large mother lode of silver in their mine at Laurion, which is way out on the Sunium Spit. So Athens is here, and Sunium Spit would be over this way. So the Athenians somewhat reluctantly took Themistocles' advice, and it turned out to be a good thing because they were able to build their fleet up to a really massive size that it never would have been otherwise. Themistocles saw quite ingeniously that if the Athenians spent that money to build up their fleet, it would make a huge difference. So in doing this, Themistocles also essentially gave the Athenians a strong sense of their own potential power, and Pericles picked up on that idea. Themistocles, however, was running into a lot of political difficulties. He was a very polarizing figure in Athenian politics. He is known to have clashed, amongst others, with another well-known politician, Aristides. He was known as Aristides the Just, and he was responsible for keeping track of the tribute that would come in. The two of them did not get along well, so Themistocles had his political difficulties, especially from others who were much more conservative than he was regarding the proper role of Athenian democracy. So Themistocles' star appears to have been waning in 472 BC because in 471 BC he actually underwent the process of ostracism, whereby he was exiled from the city for 10 years in that political process. So it appears that Pericles might have been trying to give Themistocles a boost with Persians. If that was his aim, it really was not successful. Nonetheless, it did a lot for Pericles himself. In subsequent years, as Pericles became more well-known, more successful in the 460s BC, and as the Athenians became increasingly antagonistic with Spartans, Pericles saw to it that the Athenians became much more concerned with getting their power, regardless of what type of relationship they would have with other cities, especially the Spartans. The rival for this now that Themistocles was out of the picture in ostracism, the new rival that Pericles now had to deal with was Cimon. Because Cimon, who was the big military hero in 466 BC with the defeat of the Persians at the Eurymedon, really felt that Athenians did better to maintain as peaceful and cooperative relations with the Spartans as possible. Pericles simply did not accept this. So Pericles really felt that democracy needed to become the supreme form of government in Athens, and that the demos would be the means for doing it. It could be that he was trying to make himself more powerful in the process, but it does seem that he really was a champion of the demos. He was certainly regarded that way by the demos itself, if we believe the account of Thucydides, the historian. And so we suspect that Pericles saw that as a symbiotic relationship, that in fact, if he got the demos powerful, he'd be powerful himself, but he would also genuinely move the demos forward to become the main political player in the Athenian political landscape. So Pericles really did not think that the sort of halfway setup in place right now for the demos with those old Solonian institutions like the Areopagus Council was necessarily really in the best interest of either the demos or the polis of Athens as a whole. And now you can see the darkness again, foreshadowing what's coming later when Pericles' policy turns to be very negative for the Athenians. Darkness is a good indicator. Anyway, so Pericles championed to the Athenians increasingly in the 460s BC that the Athenians should listen to anybody who believed in their own potential for power and not take time to second guess themselves because of concerns about what Spartans or other cities might think. And again, in doing this, of course, he clashed with the great general Cimon. Now, Pericles actually tried to set up Cimon to be charged with bribery the year after his great success at the Eurymedon. And as a consequence, Cimon was actually put on trial, but was acquitted. But then the real problem with Pericles was that he was much more opportunistic than Cimon. I say it's a problem not so much for Pericles himself, but for the future of the Athenian state. Pericles could see where things might but potentially go his way, and as relations independently of anything Pericles or Cimon did would deteriorated rapidly between the Athenians and the Spartans, Pericles recognized that the opportunity for the Athenians to rise to power was all the greater because he could get his point of view of anti-Spartan propaganda to be much more favorably received than the old-fashioned point of view that the Athenians and Spartans should stand together. So that would end up having a big effect on the development of the Delian League as an imperialistic state, as we'll talk about in our next video. The final point I want to make for right now about Pericles is that he was also the instigator of the war policy that the Athenians actually did use when they really were in war with the Spartans later. Here again, though, there was a problem about Pericles, and that is that Pericles was the only one who knew how to carry that war policy out. And as it turned out, with Pericles being the only one to do it, first of all, it meant that nobody else could. Second, it meant that nobody else really wanted to, as his successor Cleon would show. And third, nobody could double check to see if the policy was actually the right way to go. And as it turned out, it really wasn't. So a lot of what Pericles did really says a lot more about what Pericles was able to do as a person than whether he was a genuine beneficiary of the Athenians. The former is unquestioned. Pericles was one of the most prestigious and successful politicians in Athenian history. The latter is much more in doubt. If Pericles knew what he wanted to accomplish, and actually for the most part was able to accomplish it, was that necessarily to the benefit of the Athenian state? Would the Athenian state have been better off going in a different direction? That's, of course, hard to debate with 2020 hindsight, but it does appear that Pericles took the Athenians on a path that in fact might have been to their regret eventually. We'll now take a look at what's coming up next for the Delian League as it does transform from the original network of allies into a genuine full-scale Athenian empire under the leadership of Pericles. See you next video.